Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here to this session of Trieste Next 2020 dedicated to water scarcity, food insecurity, and malnutrition. My name is Sara Moraca. I will be the moderator of this session, and I'm pleased to introduce you our speaker, Claudia Ringler, Deputy Division Director of International Food Policy Research Institute. Then we have Olof Lundqvist, Senior Advisor of Stockholm International Water Institute. And we have Joyce Njoro, Leading Technical Specialist Nutrition at International Fund for Agricultural Development. In this session, we will try to focus on some of the main issue about climate change, food insecurity, and water scarcity, giving an overview on the international situation with some case history and best practice. So I will pass the microphone to Claudia and Jan that can begin their presentation.
Yeah, thanks so much for the kind introduction, and thanks for the invitation to Trieste. We've heard this is a wonderful city, so we all hope to visit one day. As Sara mentioned, this session focuses not only on the future of water, but also its relations to food security and nutrition. Business as usual on water and business as usual on nutrition are not options in much of the world. Moreover, doing things jointly on water and food security can make a positive difference for both. So let's first talk a bit about hunger and zero hunger. There is a specific sustainable development goal just dedicated for this human development objective. I'm sure you've all heard about it, but you might not know all of the targets that are being monitored for this. So we do have not only targets on ending hunger, but also ending malnutrition, doubling agricultural productivity, ensuring sustainable and resilient food production, and maintaining genetic diversity of seeds. So of course, everyone knows what hunger is, so we don't have to discuss that, but not everyone knows what malnutrition is. It includes three forms of poor nutrition: undernutrition, which can be reflected in being too thin for height, too short for age, etc. Right now, about 1 in 5 children are stunted, that is too short for their age. We don't worry much about the height itself, but about the potential associated lack of brain development, especially in the first 1,000 days, with potentially lifelong implications for cognitive skills and livelihood opportunities. You can see here at the bottom of the slide an image of stunted brain development on the one side and good brain development on the other side, and that's what we want to avoid. Malnutrition, of course, also includes overweight and obesity, and micronutrient malnutrition, such as lack of iron, zinc, and other micronutrients. We have about 2 billion people, or just less than 1/3 of humanity, that are affected by micronutrient malnutrition. So the important thing here is, however, that trends are not looking good. So we have growing undernutrition, we have growing overweight and obese, and the trends that are currently 1 in 3 people in the world affected are pointing towards 1 in 2 people being affected. So it does not look good. The situation on water and sanitation is no better. So here, the United Nations, they're looking at access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene, access to drinking water, improved water quality, so our lakes and wetlands, increased water use efficiency to improve the situation in integrated water resources management, and the target to restore water-related ecosystems. So unfortunately, our targets and our indicators are not on track here. Today, every third person in the world lives in a river basin at risk of water shortage and water scarcity, and the trend is growing due to population growth and climate change. So the projections to 2050 are that every second person in the world, every second person on the planet by then will live in water scarcity. And what is again very important here, and the same really as with food security, the increasing trend is largely concentrated in poor countries, in countries with low income. So, and you can see that on the right of the slide. And so we really have to do something about it, because we are growing inequity every second in the world. And it's not just the number of people living in those situations. We are also putting our economic production at risk. We are generating more GDP in water scarce areas, and our food production is also occurring in much more water scarce areas. While population growth, economic growth, and climate change are the main longer term factors driving both water and food security, COVID-19, which is known to have reduced income everywhere, but not equally, has in the short term radically worsened food and nutrition outcomes, and poor access to water makes coping with COVID-19 more challenging. This slide shows one example from a phone survey that we conducted in northern Ghana, where we found that 72% of women worried about inadequate food availability because of COVID, and 3/4 of the women noted that they had reduced the diversity of the food items that they had consumed. At the same time, more than half of the same women noted that they cannot wash their hands when needed, such as when handling dirt or diapers, because the water source was simply not available to them for hand washing. But of course, those two items, as you can already see with the case in northern Ghana, the two items are interlinked. Some of the key interlinkages include that most of the water that people withdraw, that all of us withdraw from water sources, are used to grow crops. Mostly for food, but also fiber, so cotton, and of course sometimes energy. We have these energy crops. But at the same time, while most of the water is used for these purposes, of course, irrigation is an important input to produce our food. Access to domestic water supply, so to wash our hands, but also for sanitation, is not only a moral imperative, but it also actually affects nutrition through improved health and women's time availability. If I have to walk an hour to fetch my water every day, I can of course not take care of my children. Nutrient-dense crops, importantly, are, those are the crops we want people to eat to reduce undernutrition and malnutrition. They are generally water intensive, such as animal source foods. So we talk about eggs and milk, or vegetables, fruits and nuts. So these crops increase water pollution and thus reduce the quality and quantity of water and related ecosystems. So we have this very tight interconnection. And my colleague Jan Lundqvist will now discuss what we can do about it.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Antonio, for inviting us to this session. I will hook on to some of the things that Claudia was mentioning. The first word in our title is water scarcity, and Sara, you mentioned it also. And when we talk about water scarcity, we usually relate the amount of water in relation to the number of people in a country or in a basin or something like that. So it's important not only to look upon water and climate change and what affects water aspects, but also the number of people that have to share the amount of water. And I've given some figures here to show the tremendous increase in population from the 1960s, 3 billion people, about 7.8 billion now, and 8.5 billion in a decade when the SDGs are supposed to come to an end. But as I mentioned, the amount of water that's available to us is more or less the same. It varies quite a lot between years, and between areas, of course. But what has changed, and what is, I think, a very important dimension of water scarcity, is the very unpredictable rainfall. So with climate change or the global warming, the precipitation pattern is changing. So we don't know where the rain will come, when it will come, how much it will come. And of course, it's not only scarcity we're talking about. You know very well in Italy that you've had a tremendous problem with floods and the devastation of villages and houses and bridges, all those kind of things. So water scarcity, I think, is a rather complex kind of event or process. The second part of our presentation is about nutrition, and Claudia has already given the main aspects of it. Let me just add a couple of issues here, or underline. When we talk about food security, we usually talk about the production of food, the availability of food in shops and markets and such things. But when we talk about nutrition, it's about the diets, the diversity on our plates, so to speak, what we eat and how much we eat. And it's also about the absorption of the nutrients of the food eaten. So the amount of vitamins, minerals, protein, and calories that our human body is able to absorb. And then we come back to the issue that Claudia was mentioning about the importance of wash, the water supply, sanitation, hygiene. But at the end, at the bottom of the slide, I also said that it is for policy research, for policy, it's very important to try to find out what type of crops and what type of arrangement that can ensure a high nutrition per drop of water. Can we take the next slide? I think Claudia. Okay, yes. Yeah, this next slide. Thank you. So in spite of the rapid population increase that we've seen, that I showed you from 1960s to today and to 2030, in spite of the rapid population increase, we have had an even more rapid increase in the amount of food that farmers are producing. So if we look upon the diagram to the left, I have three lines. The top line, rather steep line, that shows the amount of food in terms of kilocalories that is produced per capita from 1960 to 2011, and the solid line, and then the dotted line projections. Now you can see that there's been about, more than 30% increase per capita in the amount of food produced in the world in about 50 years. The second line in the middle is the amount of food that comes out into the market. And it's it comes in low in the diagram, and that's because a fairly large part of the food that's produced by the farmers is used for feed, it's used for biofuel production, and some of the food is lost due to storage, transport problems, and other things. The thick line in the bottom, that is what I call the health recommended diet or intake of food, what we should eat. Now, maybe Joyce can comment on that later, but I will come back to that later, but I taken as a kind of variation between about 2,000, 2,200 kilocalories per capita per day. So you see that there's a widening gap between the amount of food that is produced and supplied and what we should eat. And that means that there's a risk, and there's also a reality that a large part of the food is being lost, wasted, and we have a tremendous problem with overeating in the world today, as Claudia already mentioned. Now this graph is about kilocalories. You see to the right that also in terms of protein in the world, in the global scene, there is an improvement both in low and middle income countries according to FAO statistics. The big problem, and I think Claudia mentioned it also, is the lack of micronutrients. That remains a huge challenge. Next, please. Next slide. Yes, then Claudia mentioned that about 3/4 of the fresh water withdrawn from rivers, from groundwater sources and so on, are used to produce food. And if you calculate the amount of water that is required to produce the diet of an average person in, let's say, Sweden or Italy, in our part of the world, it's up to around 5 tons of water per day. In the poor countries, in the low-income countries, with another kind of diet, it's less. But here I've taken some examples produced by a student at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala. She did some calculation about how much water is used to produce the diet of rich people or high-income people, middle-income people, and low-income people in 3 countries, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. And you can see it for Tanzania among the high-income people with a certain diet, with a lot of waste of food and such things. The calculated amount of water can be up to 45 cubic meters per person per day. So this is to a large extent related to the kind of diet that high-income people have in relation to low-income people, but also related to the very low water productivity in these countries. We don't, or the farmers there, they're not able to produce as much crop per drop as would be desirable. Next, please. I'm sorry to show this in Italy. I mean, you should have a pasta or something like that. But I think this, what you can see on a McDonald's pack when you buy a Big Mac, you can see some information on the back of the pack saying how much of kilocalories, fat, and salt a hamburger contains. You can also see, which I think is very interesting, you can also see in what I encircled in the red square, what they call the reference intake for an average adult person. And they say it's about 2,000 kilocalories per person per day. 2,000. If you remember my previous slide, I had a variation between 2,000 and 2,200. So this is a McDonald's figure. And there are some colleagues who use the same figure for the recommended intake in terms of kilocalories. Whereas in other publications, you find much bigger, much higher numbers. For instance, in the Eat Lancet report, they use 2,500 kilocalories. So there's a huge variation in the amount of food that we are recommended to eat every day. Next, please. It's not only what we are recommended to eat, but also what we actually eat. And I've some bars here showing the actual intake of fruits and berries and vegetables among Swedish population. And you can see here that the recommended intake in Sweden is 500 grams together per day in terms of fruit and berries and vegetables. And you can see here that only about 17% of the Swedes, they have that amount of intake. So even though there is quite a big supply of these kind of products on the market, and even if people should know how much we should eat, the actual intake or the actual food habits are quite different. Next, please. So I hand it back to you, Claudia, for commenting the first point of what we all can do about this.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Jan, for explaining some of the issues that we can tackle to improve both water and food security. These are basically two additional, more generic messages. So policymakers really have a lot of options at their disposal. So they are generally in charge of developing water security strategies and nutrition security strategies. But what we believe is that if you develop those two together, then we can help ensure that nutrition policies do not worsen water security. Because if they were developed to worsen water security in the longer term, it will affect nutrition negatively. Policymakers also should do a much better job in considering the equity in access to both water and food. And this, of course, matters even more so with climate change. And I think we have seen a lot of that as a result of COVID-19 as well, the inequity in access. Thank you. And Jan?
Yes. I think we wanted to stress also that there is, of course, a policy dimension, but there's also an obligation or a responsibility for each one of us. So referring to the slides that I just showed about the amount of water that we eat, that we literally eat in terms of the amount of food, that the amount of water that is used to produce the food, it is very important that all of us are considering what amount of food we are eating and also what amount of food we are throwing away, we are wasting. And today, as Claudia showed at the beginning, we have a huge problem with overweight and obesity. Now, there are different reasons for that, but one of the reasons is obviously that we are eating too much and too much of the wrong type of food items. So according to my calculations, the amount of primary production, the amount of food that the farmers are producing, if we include both the losses, the waste of food, as well as overeating, we could probably argue that roughly half of the primary produced, 50% of the food is either lost, wasted, or gone into overeating. And that means that quite a lot of water is used in vain. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and we can close the presentation and hand back to Sara.
Thank you so much for this interesting insight for our public. And I would also to mention about Italian water footprint, that medium family in Italy consume something like 200 cubic meters per year. That it's 200,000 liters of water. So it's something on what we have to reflect all as society. So at this point, I would pass the microphone to Joyce. Joyce will introduce us some stories from her expertise. So Joyce, please.
Thank you so much, Sara, and thank you so much also for inviting me and the colleagues also to share our experiences in this forum. So I'm here representing the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and I'll be sharing with you some of the examples of that we see in our projects and what is being implemented in relation to this topic that we are discussing today. So the IFAD is an investor, so it invests in projects in different countries, developing countries, and the main aim is to address food insecurity, malnutrition, poverty, and also resilience. So that means that we are also working a lot on climate change. So basically, I would say that the approach that we are using is a food systems approach, and also trying to mainstream nutrition in agricultural type of investments. So water being part of the investments that we are working on, because what we are pushing for is to ensure that we have an integrated approach that ensures social inclusion, also ensures climate change, and ensures empowerment and gender empowerment, and also getting people out of poverty. So I'll share with you an example from Lao People's Democratic Republic. Is a project on agriculture for nutrition. This one is a 6-year project which started in 2016. It's an investment that is funded also by the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, GASIP. So the goal of this particular project was to contribute to reduced extreme poverty and malnutrition in poorest communities. And in this perspective, these are some of the most marginalized communities. They are the ethnic groups living mainly in the highlands. And so the development objective of this project is aimed to improve diversified agricultural production and to enhance household nutrition. And this is expected to enhance the life prospects of the beneficiaries. And I think there was a mention of the need to work in close collaboration and also to align with national priorities. So there was an intention to ensure that this project is fully aligned to the Laos National Nutrition Strategy and Action Plan. So the intention was that the project would help to also implement some of the commitments for the agriculture sector within the multi-sector plan. So the project was aimed to benefit about 34,000 poor smallholder households. And out of these, 43,000 were working women and 42,000 were working age men. And then in addition, 38,000 women are also expected to directly benefit from nutrition interventions, because as we said, it is a nutrition project and it is looking at the most vulnerable groups. And here the big target for nutrition is women of reproductive age, and the pregnant women and those with children up to the age of 2. That's the first 1,000 days. So how does the project intend to address these issues? So there are many interventions, but I'll pick up a few, the ones which are especially most important for this forum. So one of the interventions is to strengthen public services. That means building government staff capacities to support and converge community implementation of selected national nutrition strategy interventions. We know that nutrition cannot be addressed from a silo perspective. We need to work multisectorally. That means that we cannot, not any one sector can address nutrition holistically. So it is important that we bring all the sectors together, and each of the sectors is responsible for its own suite of interventions. So this kind of support would imply supporting systems for planning, monitoring and evaluation, knowledge management, learning, and also other technical capacities to ensure that at least the nutrition interventions that are benefiting the most poor or the ones who are most at need. It also includes developing capacities of the staff and implementing partners on a sustainable climate-adapted and nutrition-sensitive agriculture and natural resource management technologies, including training programs and how to monitor their impact. So this is particularly important because when you talk about the beneficiaries communities, who are these ethnic minorities, they live very close to the natural setting, and so the biodiversity is very important, and climate change has a big impact on their livelihoods. Now the other intervention area is to establish community-driven agriculture-based nutrition interventions. And these were done in partnership with the World Food Programme. And these include a number of interventions. Some of them would be the district and the village level multi-sectoral convergence planning. As I mentioned, we can't work in silos, and even if we have the coordination at the national level, we need to bring this down up to the community level. Because if we leave it at national level, then we lose the benefits of converging interventions to one individual. So this was supposed to support both district level and also village level planning, so that the interventions can reach the beneficiaries and address the needs, and also help to accelerate the implementation of the National Nutrition Plan. Then also working with the district development committees, bringing in all the relevant sectors, that including the socioeconomic development sector, rural development, water, planning and investments, health, and others, so that they can converge, and also with development partners in the private sector to ensure that at least there's a coordination in the way that interventions are being implemented. Then another set of interventions was to promote women-led improvement in household nutrition. I think, as was just mentioned, that at the end of the day, if we don't get to the household and beyond the household, also to the individuals within the household, then we don't really get the impact that we want to see on nutrition. And this also now entailed promoting women-led nutritional behavior change and supporting investments within the national strategy, mainly agricultural interventions addressing improved nutrient access and availability at household level. So how do we ensure that these nutrients are reaching the household level, and in particular, those who are most vulnerable? So this intervention has been implemented through farmer nutrition schools, and these are schools at the village level, and the target group is a women of reproductive age, but in particular, those who are pregnant and the ones with children under 2 years of age. So the farmer nutrition school concept is a social behavioral change communication program, which brings together agriculture sector and health sector to address multi-sectoral aspects of malnutrition. And facilitators, village facilitators are trained to support women and train them on different aspects of agriculture and nutrition. And this also aims to influence cultural beliefs, particularly concerning food and other taboos related to pregnant women and infant children. And the training also impacts basic knowledge on nutrition, healthy diets, food demonstrations, establishment of home gardens, processing and preservation. And it also closely links with the health sessions in the water, sanitation and health, and infant and young child feeding, and indoor air pollution and maternal care and nutrition. Then the other aspect is household availability and utilization of nutritious food. And the Farmer Nutrition School also aims to balance agricultural production, wild food collection, and food purchase throughout all seasons of the year. So enabling the villages to increase access and availability of food and improving their dietary diversity from their village agrobiodiversity. So these some of the interventions were promoting household vegetable and small livestock production. So expanding intensification of the production and of nutritionally rich plant and animal-based foods. And this includes extension and training on good agricultural practices, on how to grow different types of crops, and mixing that with also making sure that they're adaptable to the environment. And then also it also included irrigation, because if we talk about year-round, then we need to make sure that we address the seasonal gaps in terms of availability of food. So there was irrigation, multi-purpose village water supply, and therefore micro-irrigated gardens, so that at least there is access to vegetables and some of the basic foods that are needed for household availability. Then one important aspect here is that the project investments which support women-led household availability and utilization of nutritious food are 100% granted and financed, but beneficiaries will be required also to ensure access and usage of a toilet, or at least sanitation, as an entry point, and also the training that they have to be trained and learn about nutrition and about dietary diversity, the diets, healthy diets, and care practices. So that has to be, that's a precondition for them to get the grant. So in a midterm review conducted in 2019, it was evident that from the project, although we did not get a significant reduction in stunting, which was a 47% at a design from the baseline, because maybe just of the time period for which the midterm review was done, we still saw that there were some significant changes in other nutrition level parameters. And that particularly is on dietary diversity, which was seen to have improved a lot. And also some behavior change. Some behaviors had been adopted, which were also very towards healthy diets, and gender, women empowerment, and others. And maybe I'll just take you through those some of those. So what was realized is that the village nutrition centers had been constructed or upgraded in 305 villages. So the target was 400 villages, but this had been done in 305 villages. And almost over 1,000 village facilitators have received training of trainers, and they are the ones who are conducting the trainings in the farmer nutrition schools, which was quite, and they had already done more than one cohort of training. So they had trained more than one group of participants, who included 20,000 participants. And out of these, 18,000 are women. And 10,000 of these are pregnant women and mothers with children under 2 years of age. And then a big number of them also had received grants, and the grants had been invested mainly in vegetables, fruits, poultry, and fish, and many of them with integrated gardens. And the primary purpose, I mean, when you speak to them, they say this is mainly for home consumption. We only sell what remains. And then because it's a socially very integrated community, there's a culture of social exchange. So they share whatever they have if I grow this type of vegetable, then I share with the others what they don't have. So this also helps in ensuring diversity. And then they can also sell surplus in the market.
So Joyce, thank you. I think our time is going to the end, so I think it would be very good to open to the question from the public, if the public have some questions. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your speech. We are waiting for some questions just in case. In case that there are no questions from the public, I can ask I have pleasure to ask you something in the time we are waiting. So the first question is for Claudia. Claudia, can you explain us what are the open challenge in the research on food security and water?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think we've probably heard a lot about the challenges already this morning in terms of, or this afternoon, in terms of what we should really be focusing on. I think, we need to do research differently. We need to bring in nutrition and health scientists into any agriculture interventions and in any rural interventions. For example, when we develop a new irrigation system, as Joyce also mentioned, if we want to have food all year round in places where we don't have strong markets, then having access to water to produce food is very important. But we should not just put these systems in place with the best engineering skills. We do need the research to understand how we can get women involved in benefiting from the food, in deciding which crops are grown, in making sure that the income, because obviously some of these crops are likely being sold once you start to irrigate, you become more commercial, then how the income from the any irrigated produce that is generated, how that can be used to really support water and nutrition security. For example, that also includes investing in health services, buying the right complementary foods such as eggs or milk. So I think those are important interventions, and we need more research on how to bring these together. The other area I think we really don't know enough, and especially in low-income countries, is the impact of water pollution on nutrition and health. So we do see, rapid increases in the use of chemicals and pesticides without a lot of guidance on how they should be applied. We know there is water pollution, but it's generally not measured. And because it's not measured, we also can't say much about the impacts on nutrition and health. So there is definitely a very large research agenda, and I invite all students who participate and who listen today to think about some topics in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And Jan, I have also a question for you. So what role has public perception on water resources in the engaging process with the aim of a better use of water? Do you have some example?
Yeah, I would like to, I think we had there's a notion of the human right to water. And that's a very important principle when it comes especially to drinking water, household water, and sanitation. We know it's still quite a number of people who don't get access to water. And we also, there's also the human right to food, which is not so often talked about. I used to say that we should also link those kind of rights issues to human responsibility. Joyce, you talked about social behavior. I think there's a need for a change in terms of what people are expecting, what they're demanding, especially among the high-income group, of course. But and Claudia, you mentioned about the pollution. I mean, there's so many aspects of water problems and food problems and nutrition problems that are related to human behavior, to social aspects, to value systems. And most people, I think, are taking water for granted, and few people want to pay for water. But I used to say that we don't pay for water as such, but we pay for the water services. If you have a municipality, I mean, they have to build different type of treatment plants or distribution system, and all those things cost money. And who should pay for it? Well, we can pay over the tax bill, but it's also, we can reduce the tax bill if we as consumers, if we as citizens, not only demand our rights, but also think about how we can contribute in terms of different types of change behavior.
Joyce, thank you, Jan. Joyce, I have a question for you also. You mentioned the local, the important to have a contact with local village and to go into their culture, their approach to food, to change policy. So I would ask you, what type of role could have the indigenous knowledge that it's so important in this process? Because we know indigenous population are fragile, and we have a lot of examples also in Africa, but in Asia and South America. What role could, what value could bring the indigenous knowledge in all this frame?
Thank you so much, Sara, and that's a very good question. Because it is the indigenous knowledge and the practices of the indigenous people is very much closely linked to their food security and their nutrition. And food is very local and it's very cultural. It's at times it's even more than food. Food is has a meaning beyond just what we consume. So the indigenous people, they have the practices, they have practices, they have local knowledge about the type of crops that they grow. They know which ones are nutritious, which ones are resistant to diseases. They know because they have practiced some of these for years and years, even in terms of how to conserve seeds, how to store seeds, and how to ensure that intergenerational survival over the years. So they already have these, which they have kept and has helped them to survive for years and years. But then we are seeing that there's this threat because of climate change and also the promotion of a very narrow diversity of crops by governments, and that is threatening that very indigenous knowledge. And we need to do everything we can to ensure that we tap into it and we don't lose it, because it is very important for food security and nutrition of these fragile communities. So it is important that in terms of government, that there's clear engagement and discussion of interventions which are adapted and suitable for different groups, so that there's no one size fits all, that we all have to promote rice, we all have to promote maize, we all have to promote monoculture. But then understanding that biodiversity is really the root of our own survival, and it needs to be clearly articulated in the policy and also in the education system, because the extension workers who come to bring the messages have different types of training. Most times biodiversity has not clearly been impacted as a need. So I saw examples where you go to indigenous communities, but the kind of crops you find there are not their own crops. They are being kind of trained to eat new things and to grow new type of crops, which is not bad in itself, but then there's a risk that you're losing what they already did and what is very well they already adapted to the environment. So it is important to have the networks and of the indigenous people to also see how we can make sure that we don't lose the knowledge and we keep it, and that the policy also ensures that this knowledge is passed on from generation to generation, and also seeing how we can use technology, also the new technology, to also add research, like I think Claudia has said, are we doing enough research on some of these crops? Maybe not. And are we adding value in any way? Maybe not. So investment even by governments on some of these crops would also help in addressing food security and nutrition.
We are finishing our session. I would like to thank you. Claudia, Joyce, and Jan to join this meeting, this session, and also thank the public that follow us online. And have a nice day, and see you in the next session of Trieste Next.